The USSR started strong in the space race by putting the first object to orbit Earth in 1956. This is the well-known Sputnik, which was the first satellite. On top of this, the Soviets were the first to put a man in space. On April 12, 1961, cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin, aboard the USSR's Vostok 1, was the first man in space, and he orbited the Earth in 89 minutes. This devastated the United States, as they planned a man to go in space in the following May. By the time the US made 3 orbits around Earth, the USSR made 17 and spent 25 hours in space. The thing we know as a space race wasn't just to learn and progress in science and space travel, but it was a way to beat or one up the Soviet Union in the Cold War. So here we have a graph based off of a Wikipedia table of government funding to NASA during this time from 1958 to 1976. And we see here that during the beginning, during all of the events that was previously mentioned by the Soviet Union, up until like 1962, the U.S. has a pretty low budget for NASA. But as you see, after 1962, it drastically rises during like the Mercury missions and up towards the Gemini missions. And then after that, we see a decrease because we'll see further that the Soviet Union is not accomplishing anything at this time, and we do not have to drastically fund for. We are going to be to the moon by 1969 right here. And yeah, that basically sums it up. This is really important because the purpose of this graph is to showcase the amount of money that was given to to NASA. And if the U.S. government is not giving money to NASA, then NASA doesn't even matter, and the space race doesn't even matter. So next up we have John F. Kennedy's moon speech, and this is really important and relevant because it's coming from the perspective of the U.S. government and specifically the U.S. president, and it will basically show the drive that the U.S. had during this time. So basically starting off with line 11, it says, the exploration of space will go ahead whether we join it or not, and it's one of the greatest adventures of all time, and no nation which expects to be the leader of other nations can expect to stay behind in the race for space. Next, we have, to cut ahead, all require us to make effort to solve these mysteries, to solve them for the good of all men, and to become the world's leading spacefaring nation. To basically summing this up, and you'll hear this throughout the speech, just want to pick these very concrete examples that scientific progression is going to go whether the U.S. is in it or not. It's a matter of can we defeat the Soviet Union, or this is a way to beat the Soviet Union. This next piece of evidence is really short and sweet. So basically, this is a whole space race timeline, and it just shows how the USSR basically was ahead of the entire space race until it hits 1967, when all of a sudden the U.S. declares, we're going to start an Apollo mission and get to the moon within 2 years, which you see here. It started in 1967 and then ended in 1969 with Neil Armstrong reaching the moon. The Apollo missions did carry on, but this was the main part when they landed a human on the moon. Basically, we'll see that this ties with the next piece of evidence that they were actually rushing to get to the moon rather than, well, trying to do things safely. The next and final piece of evidence is Apollo 1, and basically this is going to represent the amount of malfunctions that happened within the space race on the side of the U.S., because there were many that happened. And Apollo 1 was basically, to sum it up, was a capsule fire that happened and killed all 3 of the astronauts. It wasn't even put into space. So there's something kind of hidden within this, because as you see here, it says that in many views of these astronauts, the Apollo command module wasn't ready yet. Engineering changes were happening while they were preparing for countdown tests. So people were very skeptical of this. The morning of the test, the crew suited up and even detected a foul odor breathing in the oxygen tank. They had to fix that. Basically, you can see that it was very scuffed. The reason why this shows the U.S. really just rushing to get to the moon is because in the point of view of these astronauts, they were they knew something was up. They thought it was rushed and weren't comfortable with it. But the U.S. government, NASA, they didn't care. The only thing they were focused on was getting to the moon as fast as possible before the Soviets. Well, things happened because of the sloppy speed to just beat the Soviets, not actually learn things about science. Now, how can we compare this? We can compare this to Mars, because basically what happened is you can see the year that they announced to go to Mars, not go to Mars, but to start studying and just thinking about Mars was in 1952. If you go all the way down here, it is not the projected date to just have like vehicles and concepts of human exploration was put in is like projected for 2038. So you see, they can take nearly a century to do this because they want to just simply learn about Mars and they're not pressured by the USSR or any big power. But because of the pressure, with the Apollo missions and the space race, everything was rushed and they were just trying to beat the Soviet Union.